Hello and welcome to Scrapbooking Station. In this video I've got a quick way to make those stepper cards. So if you've ever ruined a card base from the slits and those funky score lines, this is a great way. It takes two pieces, so I'm going to put the camera over my shoulder and we'll get started. To start this video, we're going to make a 4x6 stepper. So it's going to be 6 inches wide, 4 inches high. So the 2-piece stepper, your base card is made up of 2 pieces. So I've got a 6-inch for the width of my stepper piece, and I've got my 10th that is 8 inches long, and in this case I'm going to make it 4 inches wide. So the 10th's really easy. I've got a 4x8 cardstock, and I'm just going to score it at 4 inches. And that's going to make the TP portion of my step card. And then for the step portion, I've got an 8x6 inch, so I want to score it at 1, and then at 2, because we're going to come back down, so this is the first step. Then I've got 6 inches left over, so I'm just going to divide that at half and score that at 3. So if you were going across, your scores would be 3, 6, and 7. And let me give everything a good crease. I'm going to find some papers to cover it, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've found some paper and cardstock, and I layered it up. So I've got my teepee, and this is what it turned out to look like. And then this is the stepper portion. So this is how it's going to display. And so besides the structure itself and how quick it comes together, of course once you paneling and layering is easier as well because you're just dealing with rectangles. And I went ahead and did the inside also. Now, when I attach this, I'm going to attach it on the front to this and onto the back of my card base. And so what you're going to notice is I can put it anywhere. So it's going to finish out something like this. If I want to center it, I can. If I want to move it over, I can move it over in any direction. And that really depends on what else I want to stick on the card. And I've already decided that as well. I want to put a tag, some of a tag coming off it. So I'm probably going to situate it all the way to the side. I like having a little edge sticking out, so it's going to be like so. And then because I can, I've got another little tag and another little element that's actually going to attach behind my teepee. So let me throw all this together and I'll be back with the finished piece. The finished first project turned out really well. And so I've actually used the foam squares to attach on top. I used foam squares to put behind, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers on this little card. You're going to find that it's sturdier than the traditional cutting slits and score lines, and also you don't see the mechanics behind there. So if you like extending things, because there are no slits on the inside, that all disappears, so you don't have to worry about that. Of course, I made my envelope. So let me quickly go through these materials. The image comes from Hunky Dory Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It's a little square book. I've got a generic cutting die. That's a set of nested tags. My colored cardstock is Stamping Up, and so I've got Bordering Blue, Mint Macaroon. A couple of thin line border dazzles here from Paper Wishes, and then the Sentiments is Stamping Up from the Lift Me Up set, done in Memento ink. And then lastly, I've got a little brad from Stamping Up as well. Okay, since that took about 3 minutes, let's work on some different sizes. I'm going to start this second project by backtracking a little bit. All these score lines are across. So whether it's the tent fold or the stepper, all the score lines are going to be the same as long as I want a 4-inch high card. So my cardstock would always start at 8 inches, and then my score in case of the tent would be at 4 inches. But the width is arbitrary. So the width of this piece is arbitrary, and the width of your stepper is arbitrary. If I wanted to make the 6.5, I would just start with the 6.5 by 8 inch wide card. If I wanted to make it 8 inches by 4, same thing. So that's something to keep in mind, because what I want to do now is kind of focus on my tent. So we're going to work with a 7 by 5 inch finished card, and I'm going to start with, of course, a 10-inch long, and the width is going to be determined by my focal. So I'm going to have a focal, a train again. I'm kind of into trains. So I'm going to score it at 5 inches. So I've got a 10 by 4 again in this case, because this is what my focal needs to be. And then the width of my stepper is going to be 7 inches, which is the width of my finished card. Now the steps. In the first one, I chose 1-inch step. And so I scored it at 1, and then I scored it at 1 again because it has come back down to the bottom, and I would have been left with 8 and scored at 4. But in this case, I kind of like this embossed piece here, so I want more of it to show on the front of my card. So I'm going to increase my step to 1.5, which means I have to come in 1.5 again to 3, which means what's left on this 7 by 10 inch piece of cardstock are 7 inches. And so I want to score it 3.5 from this direction, which would be 6.5 from that way. Anyway, let me go ahead and score it, put some of this together, and then we'll continue. Okay, now that I've got everything scored, actually I finished decorating it as well, because what I want to talk about is attaching your tent to your stepper. And so, in this case, I'm more concerned about the front of this being flush with the front of my stepper. And I know I'm going to come in 3/4 inches, so if I were to line this up square, which I would do, against here and against here, I'm going to peel off these 2 tapes and just attach to the front. So again, I know I want to be 3/4 in, and I want this flush. Once I do that, I want to fold this flat, because more score lines are going to chew up more card, and it might be that that's not going to totally be flush in the back, but I want it totally flat when I send it. So if I were to set this up, flip it over, then I'm going to set up the back. And so all I do is I put some adhesive down here, and then adhesive toward the bottom of my tent. So let me attach that. I'm going to finish that card, and we'll be back with that one. I want to talk about card blanks, because this is a 5 by 7 card blank. This comes from Hunky Dory, so if you work with card blanks, you can still do these steppers without having score lines in the wrong places. And so the first thing you want to do is, of course, use your score line and make your step. So this is, again, a 1-inch stepper. So if I were to open this card all the way, I scored it 1 inches and 2 inches, and I did it from both sides. And so my stepper could be like this if I wanted it symmetrical. Now I think what I'm going to do is going to end up cutting this off, because I want to use this piece of cardstock for my interior rather than cut into another card base. Also, the reason I brought up that other focal is this focal. Of course, another great thing about this card structure is you can use 2 different card bases for your tent and for your stepper portion, which is kind of unusual for most of your cards. But what I want to talk about is I did do a scalloped edge on the front of this, and so I know this is not going to come to the bottom. Actually, I'm not sure where this is going to be. So when I attach my tent to my stepper, I'm going to start in the back, kind of the same way. So figuring out the back and then folding it all up, putting adhesive just at the bottom edge of my scallop, and then attaching to the front. So let me finish both of those 2 projects, and then we'll be back. This is how the second project finished out, and I just want you to notice I added this large, really wide grosgrain ribbon. I just made sure I was kind of over and above this first step before wrapping around the front of my tent. I added a big old knot and a sentiment. And so this is the outside and how the front turned out. And on the inside, I've just got a piece of paper with some of the scraps from the topper. Of course, if I got an embossing folder used on my card, I like to replicate that on my envelope. So this is a store-bought envelope, 5 by 7, and I just used the same embossing folder as last time. So from Tim Holtz, this train track, to do the envelope. So these materials, well, first off, the image for the focal comes from Kanban Crafts, and it's from the Gentleman's Journal A6 Topper collection. And so that's it in its original size. Of course, you can trim them, and there's like 6 of each. The thing that's different about these from Hunky Dory, which I typically use, these are a lot thicker. This is probably about 140, 160 pound cardstock. So that worked out really well. I also used their materials. So the tent came from this piece 12 by 12, and this is also part of the Gentleman's Journal collection. Then you've seen this before. This is they're coated on one side, very natural colors, and then craft on the other side. And that's why when it opens, you can see the craft color, and you can also see the image or the texture of the train tracks. Then with that, I've got a sentiment that came from Tattered Lace. So this came from a magazine that accompanied this cutting die. And then lastly, the ribbon is an old Stampin' Up! Grosgrain ribbon. Okay, in this third project, just primarily added a bunch of die cuts. So I have several die cuts here with Stampin' Up! Cardstock, and then this pattern with the dots. If you're a subscriber and you saw the sequins video, I just had to add some sequins. Then the inside, again, I talked about cutting off the back of this base card so I could use for embellishment. So I've got a couple strips here, and then some little die cuts that have to do with dogs and cats, and then happy birthday. So that's how this one turned out. Let's talk about some of these cutting dies, because two of them come from Tattered Lace. So I've got my Kitten Cuddles that makes up the focal. This is a generic heart cutting die, and then the stuff on the inside is Cuddly Icons, which are also Tattered Lace. The heart and happy birthday are generic cutting dies, so hearts are part of a nested collection. This fence is a spellbinder, so I've had that for a little while, but I love it, especially when you attach it to that first step. It adds a lot of dimension when it's displayed. And you'll see that when I take the photos. So let me leave you with some photos, and then I want to talk about the relationship between the tent and the stepper before we finish up. I want to talk about the relationship between your tent and your stepper. And that's because in the first two samples, I started out with the length of the card being the same. And the reason I've done that is when you layer one over the other and you're to open it, it's going to open flat. Well, they're the same length, so you'd expect that. So whether it's a 4x6 in this case or 5x7, they're going to open flat really well. Not that you can't do it the other way. And actually, in this third project, it turned out because this teepee, or this tent, was actually 8 inches long. And so when I cut off the 2 inches on this 10-inch long card base, I ended up with 8 inches for both. And so this is going to open up flat as well. Not that you don't have to. I mean, I like that they open up flat. But when I first started creating these, I thought, well, gosh, any size will work. And so this is a 5.5-inch square card finish size. And so that means, well, I did cut off the edge, but basically I've got an 11-inch long tent fold. And then on this, it's a single step with a single back, and so it is way shorter. And so you can see where if I try, well, let's open it this way. If I try, I mean, this is only going to open so far. So that's something to keep in mind. You can do it, but that's how it's going to turn out. Now the other card that I made works the other way. This is a 4.5-inch wide card, and it's about 8 inches long. So I stacked it up with lots of things, but I made a wide step. So this is 1.25-inch step back and forth, and it's a lot longer than my 9-inch thing. And so what's going to happen is, looks okay on the inside. On the outside, you've got a little bit, because this is shorter than this stepper card base, you're going to get that result. Okay, I want to talk about raised steps and whatnot. And so, the way I started this is actually a raised step card, and if I turn it this way, let me see if you can see, that's what it looks like. So each step does not come down to the bottom, and I've got 3 steps. And so what I would do is, if you've made your standard steppers before, I would take those measurements. But all I did is I took a piece of cardstock and I figured out how high I wanted this piece, and then I just started dividing. But like I said, if you've got templates or whatever, just copy the same dimensions as you do. Just make it 2 separate pieces for your stepper and your tent. Anyway, I'm just going to leave some quick photos of that, and I hope you give this a try. If you've tried steppers before and you don't like making them because that base is so persnickety and those slit cuts and those scores, that all goes away. Anyway, I thank you for watching.